Hello everyone, welcome to episode 11. We're back with another rant episode. This week is going to be pretty fun because we have topics that I feel like we're going to disagree on, so we're going to have a bit of debating. And Vishwa is going to start this one off.
Okay, I'm going to be talking about climate and capitalism, and why capitalism, although was the economic system that got us into this dire state of climate crisis, is also our only way out of the climate crisis. So, this rant is sort of inspired by this meeting that I went to earlier this week of socialist fightback at McGill and Concordia universities. Essentially what they are is a group of socialist activists that are sort of providing educational resources to people about all sorts of things. Like, for example, like this week was socialism and the climate. They provided a socialist perspective and like how like fighting climate change is only like possible with like a revolution and things like that. And they talked about Iran and a couple weeks ago and things like that. They're like this massive global Marxist organization. And obviously, you guys all know me, not very much of a Marxist. However, I thought it was a really interesting meeting. And I'll tell you why. I think it provided a perspective that we don't really hear in society either. And it actually forced me to think about why I believe the things I do, and why I think that there is a capitalist case for fighting climate change. And only with that counterfactual presented to me by this Marxist group was I able to articulate and understand the very core tenets of my own beliefs. So, let's get right into this rant. Firstly, let's talk about what capitalism is and what capitalism isn't. Capitalism fundamentally is about markets and companies. It recognizes that in order to innovate, in order to be different, there needs to be a motivation. There needs to be basically a selfish motivation to do that. And capitalist markets use profit as that motivation. In order for people to actually change the way that society operates, change and innovate new products, start new companies, etc., there needs to be something in it for them personally. Simply because, in my belief, and the belief of many other capitalists, and that something that is backed up by data, humans are inherently selfish creatures. And if they don't see something immediately in it for them or for their family, then they won't do it. It's unfortunate that saving our planet, helping our society, etc., doesn't motivate people to do stuff. You know, we can argue about whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing. I think it's somewhat sad. But in the end, the reality is people are selfish, and they're motivated by their own self-interest. Capitalism is not about no restriction or total individualism with no regard for collective well-being, etc. At least, that's not what it should be, in my view. For too long, companies have had too much room from governments to destroy the climate and emit unreasonable amounts of energy while destroying ecosystems in the process. And let me stress that the very essence of corporations is to make profit. They're not motivated by anything else. This is not the fault of the companies being like these evil bad guys. This is something I agree with the socialists on. This is the fault of our current system that allows those things to happen. Their goal is to make profit for their shareholders, and they're doing that in a way that they are allowed to. And the way that they're allowed to do so is by ruining the environment. The solution for us to change this status quo is not to dismiss this powerful profit motivation as being inherently immoral or evil, but to harness this profit motivation and use it to reward a climate action rather than climate destruction. This requires a realignment of the principles and a fundamental reimagination of the role of government in markets. Okay, let me present what I call climate capitalism. This is different than greenwashing, guys. This actually is real climate action that is taken in the name of capitalism. Here are some key tenets of it. Number one, government intervention into markets to encourage green things. So this looks like heavy tax benefits for companies that are either producing green technology that are, creating more sustainably produced solar panels, for example, that are investing in wind and solar and nuclear and things like that. Companies that are trying to find a way for us to move away from fossil fuels and look for a future-proof society. So here's an example. So any company, regardless of whether they're an energy company or not, has some investment. So we can say that the government will give you X dollars off tax for every green energy company your bank or your or an individual even is investing in, and they will increase your tax burden by an additional X dollars or X percent or whatever for every oil company that you're investing in. So this allows even like oil companies, which are like definitely like one of the most guilty of environmental destruction, this allows even oil companies not just to go down and take their entire workforce with them, but not only does it encourage them to like, first of all, just change what they're doing and pivot in a completely different direction. I mean, this has happened before with companies, but it actually ensures that their economic interests, such as like their workers and stuff like that, are still protected just because these companies aren't like completely going under. This is a method that allows these companies to evolve and diversify and even benefit from this. So here's another example of something that I support. And this is something that we do have in Canada, although to an extent that I think is far too low and has a lot of really corrupt expenses, but it's a carbon tax. I think this is a really salient way of encouraging green things. I mean, obviously, like, heating and things like that should not fall under the burden of carbon tax. Like, that shouldn't be on the consumer to, like, pay carbon for, like, something that's, like, a provincial or city-based problem. But what it does is it helps eco-friendly companies level out their price differences. This carbon tax needs to be, number one, salient, which means it's visible to the consumer, and number two, quite substantial, so that it makes the relative price of choosing eco-friendly options, which are like slowly moving down in price, getting close to their, energy inefficient counterparts. It allows them to sort of make up for that price differential. Only if this tax is heavy-handed. Given two equal goods, people will always buy the cheaper one. And if we make the cheaper one the greener one, that's ultimately a good for society. It is a privilege of the wealthy to choose sustainable things. But by introducing a heavy-handed carbon tax and changing relative pricing, we can ensure that that is no longer the case. To my critics from the right, I know a carbon tax in the Canadian right is like a big taboo. This is a very heavy-handed government intervention. I'm fully aware of that. And I believe that this is the kind of government intervention that a lot of people are turned off by. But in my opinion, this is the kind of government intervention that we need in order to save our planet. Look, I'm not proposing that we ban things, that we get rid of things, that we remove people's freedom of choice entirely, but rather that we just realign these incentive structures so that the interests of our planet and our own rational self-interests are both within the same sphere, that we're not fighting two opposing battles here, that we're rather aligning our interests with the interests of the collective. I'm not saying that we subsidize unprofitable companies just because they hold a lot of jobs. I'm not proposing that we go full corporate welfare on these companies and hype up green energy companies even though they're not doing anything. This is very economically conservative thing to do. This is a fully market-based system that I'm sure Milda has a lot of disagreements with, and it encourages entrepreneurship. It's pro-business because of the incentives that we give green energy companies, and it basically ensures that whatever country enacts these policies becomes a hub for these green energy companies. Eventually, that leads to competition between different countries, providing even better incentives for green energy and green manufacturing and things like that. And basically, this encourages a competition over the kind of thing that we want, which is, sustainable technology, instead of a competition over the kinds of things that we don't want, which is like oil and mining and coal and things like that. To my critics from the left, look, I'm not going to say much. Milda, I'm sure you have a lot of criticisms of this entire frame of mind. I won't speak much to this because, Milda, you have a lot to say. But what I will say is this. How do you plan on telling billions of people to cut their consumption and find ways to capture carbon? There is no way for people to do this unless it's within their rational self-interest to do so. the only alternative is doing so by force. The market is one of the most powerful tools that we have as humanity. It is amoral in nature. It can be used for bad, very clearly, but it can also be used for good, so long as governments realign the incentives to protect individual freedom and our climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishwa. I think you preface this because I do have a lot of critiques. I even wrote everything down so I would have everything on my notes. But yeah, we can have a discussion about this. I think the solution that you propose is something that I can also support. I realize how messed up the world is and that change is very slow, and I do see these solutions as being, better than nothing, of course. But they are already happening, and in many countries, notably the European Union, notably leading Asian states, as you mentioned, Canada. Of course, it could be happening more extremely, but I kind of want to have an answer which shapes my worldview and kind of gives you another possible solution to the climate crisis. So I think all of this, like the way that we judge your solutions really depend on two things. Firstly, they depend on our individual values and like how do we see the purpose of life, and secondly, they depend on our political system, our economical system, and how politicians can actually change the emission levels. So let me start off with the first kind of segment. I think what you said about humans being selfish and stuff, I do believe that a lot of these notions about humans being selfish, about us trying to just survive and seek the best for ourselves, are somewhat socially constructive notions, which have been exacerbated by the sort of cutthroat system that capitalism has put us in. I think that the reason why humans are like this and they don't trust others and they just want to seek the best for themselves right now is because they're scared that they will go hungry tomorrow, and they are so uncertain about the future. And of course, these kind of notions that are socially constructive in a way take years to change. But I think it is a very important thing if we want to have an impact on the planet. And what you said, like in the end of your rant about, how will we tell 1 billion people to change their own consumption? I think the people are not the primary agent we should be affecting. I think it is the big corporations we should be targeting first, but I'll talk about that a bit later. But I think generally it's the rich that would need to change the most. Since poor people, yes, as you said, they cannot afford sustainable products, but usually they overall consume way less than people who are of middle class or higher middle class or wealthy people. They buy less clothes, they buy less food. Maybe they even grow their own food, which is a lot more sustainable than buying chicken from the farms where they slaughter millions of animals. So I don't have any issue with telling myself, because my values, like I am a very privileged person, I have everything I want in life. I have no issue telling myself to consume less because my values tell me that, yeah, the world is going to die if we don't all individually chip in. And even though I would consider myself somewhat of a materialist because I do love new things and I do love going on vacations and having new clothes, but for the sake of the planet, I would give all of these things up. I would live in a smaller apartment. I would have less clothes if I knew that we all individually are taking these actions and are having a positive effect on the world.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I understand what you're saying, but just to address one particular point in what you said, in that it's the behavior of the wealthy that needs to change, and I think that's obviously self-evidently true for like the super wealthy that are flying around in private jets and burning, heaps and heaps of CO2 in the process. However, another portion of our problem is not the super wealthy. It's the people in between, right? It's not just the ultra poor that are consuming, that are consuming like the cheaper goods. It's the middle class as well. Of course, we're in an affordability crisis. People in general are sort of looking for the best deals. If you look at everyone that's buying Shein clothing, for example, you're not going to see wealthy people buying that. That's not something that the 1% buys. No, the 1% is buying their $300 farm-raised sheep, like where you can like see the name of the sheep that's like raised the wool for your long underwear or whatever. No, it's the average person is the one that's consuming these incredibly toxic products like fast fashion and things like that, which are arguably bigger contributors of climate change than anything else. And if you look at that, if you look at meat consumption, yeah, it's not the ultra poor that are consuming a lot of meat, but the rich people, if you look at all the celebrities now, they're going vegan now because for the sake of the planet. It's the people that are relatively well off, but not off enough that they can afford luxurious things that make up the majority of people, at least in the West. And I think that that's the kind of behavior that we need to change. It's the people that own small businesses, the people that, work mid-level corporate jobs and things like that. These are the people that, in addition to poorer people, but this middle-class people both have the problem of consumption, in which they consume a lot of stuff, but they also have the problem of price, where they can't afford to buy, more sustainable things, which is precisely like the case for my point of taxes and stuff like that. And everyone, of course, there's critics that'll say like, okay, that just makes life more expensive for the average person, and now they just can't afford anything. But the thing is, if these relative prices change, then of course the prices of those more sustainable goods and stuff will also change. I also take issue with the notion that we are not selfish. Maybe that's a critique of our capitalist system. It could be. I don't think anyone knows that for sure. But what we do know is right now, if you're telling me, like, hey, look, you can do something for the good of everyone, but it's only you that's doing it, I'm less likely to do that than you can do something that's good for your family, and it's only you that's doing it. I feel like I personally, and I think I speak for a lot of people, am basically motivated by the well-being. Of course I care about, everyone in the world, but my principal motivations are for me and the people I care about.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely see your points. I definitely see parts of them being true, and that's why I do very much support subsidizing sustainable companies. I wish that vegan options would become a lot cheaper here. I think, yeah, on the selfishness, that's the problem with the collective responsibility. That, if no one's doing it, or if you're alone doing it, or if there's, 10 people doing it, not 1,000, then you're just kind of like, why should I do it at all? So that's why I think the most that we should be having is the cultural shift, sort of.
Yeah.
Because
my argument's a very Adam Smithy kind of argument, in the sense that, like, everyone working in their own rational self-interest, not for the interest of the collective good, ultimately will lead to the collective good. Of course, he, used that to advocate for a complete laissez-faire, approach, and I'm advocating for basically the opposite of a laissez-faire approach.
Yeah, for sure. I wish that we would be having that cultural shift where we wouldn't feel the need to buy so many clothes from Shein, not because they're cheap, but just because, we just don't need more clothes.
Yeah, we don't.
What is the obsession with the material things? What is the obsession with having a job as a life purpose, or money as a life purpose, or new items as the happiness of life? This is just completely poison to our minds, and I hope that in the future people will be a lot more smart.
Yeah, that's the bare minimum we can ask for.
Yeah.
All right.
And the second thing
go ahead, Milda.
I wanted to talk about also is the sort of political system and the economic side to things. So I think, your solutions, they can work to an extent, but because the whole issue of the climate crisis is capitalism. That's like the root issue, right? And since in a lot of countries, even the biggest emitters like the USA, like China, usually governments and companies and like corporations sort of cooperate, sort of go hand in hand in some situations. And that's what keeps the core issue alive. If in the USA we have huge corporations that are emitters literally funding the Conservative Party in their election years, or if politicians are shareholders in huge companies, I consider that a huge problem, because there is a huge bias there what kind of policies they're going to implement. If China's national companies which are also huge emitters, polluting the planet, what kind of interest does the Chinese government have to change?
I agree 1000% with everything that you just said.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's why I think these are firstly the issues we should be tackling. And what I would propose instead of the taxes and subsidies, I mean, if I could, if people would, in a democracy, would vote for these things, is just a bigger cultural shift, an economic system shift. I don't think we should be focusing on the increase of our economy, but rather degrowth and building less buildings, making use of old buildings, retraining people, just kind of having an economy that is not focused on the growth, but rather using the resources that are finite and that we have. And I would also very much focus on the redistribution of wealth, because I think that a lot of the problems that we have in capitalism and the affordability crisis comes from the huge wealth gap that we have right now.
Yeah, I mean, those are two issues that will just completely take us. We can talk for hours about those, so we'll save those for our next podcast. Maybe not our next one, but a future one. Yeah, I'd love to talk about degrowth and redistribution. Okay, enough about what I'm saying. What are you talking about today?
Yeah, so my rant today is going to be a bit scattered and all over the place. I got the inspiration for this rant by talking to conservatives, as you might not believe, on campus, who were talking about our political beliefs. And a lot of the times people say, oh, I'm a conservative, or oh, I'm a capitalist, but I'm also progressive. And I sort of started thinking, what does progressive really mean? And why is it even a thing? So in my rant today, I want to talk about why I hate some of the terms that we commonly use in our political lingo, and a few possible ways I could critique them or replace them with something else. Okay, so I think progressiveness in general is, talking about a progressive social policy, something that is modern, something that pushes for social change and progress. And a lot of the times, I guess, when we think about progressiveness, at least when I think about progressiveness, I think of, people supporting LGBT rights, people supporting the freedom for anyone to express themselves however they want to, people supporting pronouns, and just the liberation of people in general. That is progressiveness to me, I guess. And so whenever I hear someone say that they're progressive, I sort of think, well, why is it even a thing that we can be progressive? Because a lot of these things that I just mentioned, having the right to marry someone that you love, or having the right to visit someone in the hospital after they have been in an accident, even if you're not married, because that's not allowed in many countries, having the right to put on high heels and not be assaulted in the street when you're a man, or call yourself by pronouns that are not of your biological sex. All of these issues, I think, that are human rights issues and issues of individual freedom, issues that are simply moral and humanly. These are not political questions, but we have somehow made them to be political questions by putting them under the umbrella called progressiveness. And so I think when you give people the choice to either be progressive or not be progressive, or be conservative or something, or just be neutral, you sort of give people the choice to not support human rights. and you normalize that, and you don't really keep these people accountable. And that's how we restrict the progress that we have socially, and also that's how we hurt minorities in our societies. So a common critique that I hear about progressiveness is that, look, progressiveness is just too radical. It's like about having neo-pronouns, and now that's just crazy. Like, what do you mean? I'll have to call people by some sort of neo-pronouns, and I don't like that. Well, I think generally that is not the case. I think neo-pronouns and supporters of them and like advocates for them are a minority of the LGBT movement. I think that the media really likes to sensationalize what's, I guess, uncommon, and they really like to sensationalize the minority of certain movements to make them lose support. This is what happened with feminism, when even right now to this day when I talk to men, they believe that feminism is about hating men, wanting the superiority of women, or killing male babies even. To this day, which is not the case, obviously not the case, but the media has sort of persuaded them to believe this. And the LGBT movement is also not about turning kids gay, which is just propaganda, or, you know, having neo-pronouns for everyone being sort of forced on you. I think that even if a pronoun policy was enacted in states, it would be probably something very moderate and also concerning human rights. It would just be like, hey, support people's pronouns in the workplace or in educational institutions because people have the right to be called what they want to be called. And I really don't think that it's that hard to respect someone's name or by how someone likes to be called, right? So that's why I don't understand this critique coming from conservatives usually. So that is about progressiveness. Vishwa, if you want, interrupt me at any time also.
Yeah, who are you talking to that thinks feminism is about killing male babies? Like, what the heck? What kind of friends do you have?
Not my friends, but like I have talked to men in, I don't know, acquaintances that there was a trend on TikTok, I believe a year ago or maybe 2 years ago, where women were, I guess, joking about literally aborting like male babies, and it's really effed up, I know, but that was a thing. Yeah.
That's news to me.
So, well, maybe you don't use TikTok. I'm like,
yeah, I'm so glad I'm not on TikTok.
I love TikTok, but that's another topic. Okay, anyway, moving on to the second thing that I really hate about political terms is that we started using radical terms such as communism, fascism, sort of these far and radical political ideologies as just calling them everything. People call everything fascist nowadays. People call everything communist. And I think that it really gives the stigma on especially left-wing ideology. If we start calling everything communism, we will never even consider left-wing ideology to be something that we can actually implement because, well, and it's extremely harmful in my opinion, because we can be considering socialist policies easily and they would really help us. Okay, so, and this inspired me because I saw Candace Owens. If you know Candace Owens, Vishwa is like cheering. I follow her on Instagram because I think that she posts a lot of, she really is the representative of US conservatism for me. And I like seeing what she posts so I could know what's going on in her circles, And so she posted a photo with Kanye West, White Lives Matter. Then the next day she posted about PayPal. I guess PayPal introduced some sort of policy where they could actually fine users a quite big amount of money due to misinformation. So she was talking all about this. She was like, look, PayPal's new policy is communism. They've went full communism. They want to fine people for having the freedom to speech, from having an opinion that is more conservative and stuff. Well, I checked with PayPal. They actually didn't introduce this policy. I think it was either a mistake or they really, really quickly rolled it back when they started getting all of these critiques and their stocks just fell a lot that day. But that's besides the point. But I think that using these terms is just really populistic. And I know that Candace likes using these kind of terms a lot, but I just really think we should be erasing them from our vocabulary if we're not actually talking about Marx, or not talking about history, because I think it provides a very bad image of these ideologies. And then the third thing that I wanted to talk about is liberalism. Liberalism is such a broad term for me, and when I meet new people, I feel like everyone has a different view of what liberalism is. For me, liberalism, firstly, is about economics. It's about free trade, it's about capitalism, it's about globalization. That's the first image and the first words that pop up in my head when I think about liberalism. But secondly, of course, it's also some sort of social policy. I guess a lot of people would call liberals social progressives, right? But I also think this is a problem. I think that liberalism cannot be the epitome or the only choice you have as a voter if you want to be socially progressive, because it is not the epitome of liberty and liberation of peoples, because it is very much based on capitalism. That's why I really don't like liberal feminists. Liberal feminists don't really have the class consciousness or the knowledge on the patriarchy and how hierarchies work in the world to push for the liberation of women, the true liberation of women. A lot of liberal feminists are really obsessed with just pushing for more participation of women in high-ranking positions, for more representation of women in big companies and governments. All of these things, in my opinion, of course, they're better than nothing, but they're very tokenistic. And usually they just put women in places where they're not really accustomed to be, kind of forcing them to be in places which are not friendly for women. This is what happens when liberal feminists push for women to go to the military more, to even out the patriarchy and the misogyny there. You're just literally putting women in a space filled with males that always say sexist comments. And I talked why this is bad in a few other episodes, so you can check those out. Another thing that liberal feminists does is are really obsessed with the whole girl boss and female CEO movement. And I literally saw so many TikToks on this. They're look, girl, if you just want to be successful in life, just ask for a bigger wage. And when you go to work meetings, make sure to sit up straight and spread your legs and talk in a bit of a deeper voice so men actually take you seriously. And I'm just are you kidding me? You're literally teaching women to act more like men in order for them to succeed. I don't think that this is what we should be pushing for. I think we should be pushing for women to act like themselves and still be taken seriously because they're human beings and they are deserving to be respected. And we should also be changing the opinions of men. We should not be teaching women to change themselves to adapt to the messed up system that we have. So this is how liberalism, a lot of the times, when you mix social policy with economics and with the capitalistic system that we have, can really, really harm social movements and the liberation of peoples. Thank you.
Wow, that was a great rant. Like you said, touched on a lot of different issues. I just also want to make something very clear for people that were listening to this podcast. I'm not a fan of Candace Owens. Okay, I don't like Candace Owens. I don't even follow her on Instagram. That's how much I hate Candace Owens. Just in case anyone was thinking that Milda was being serious when I was cheering. So Milda, I have a couple things that I'd like to say, and most of them are related to the first part because I don't really have much issues with the second part of your rant. But the idea that sort of progressive ideology is basically like an ideology that puts human rights first. And when you look at the stated goals of progressive ideologies, like it's like, you know, removing social barriers, liberating people, etc. I completely agree. I think that, it's an ideology that is very centered on ensuring that, everyone's rights are respected regardless of how they identify, what gender they are, what race they are, etc., etc. The issue that I have, however, is moving from that sort of fundamental truth about progressive ideology into sort of something that I consider to be fiction, which is that progressive policies are necessarily the only policies that advance human rights, and things like that. I hear a lot of people basically say oh, if you don't support free public transportation, you are against human rights. I think that there's a clear distinction on whether oh, I support that LGBT people have the right to exist as sort of a fundamental view on human rights. That's really not much of a question right there as far as I'm concerned. Versus I think that we should have, like you said, these compelled pronoun laws, which a lot of people may have disagreements with. They may say, look, I respect LGBT people, I will use these pronouns, but I don't think that they necessarily should be forced. How do you see that?
Yeah, I think, first, I have a couple of things. Firstly, I definitely see that progressiveness is such a broad term and can incorporate so many different policies. The public transport thing, I think, is definitely, it's not a human right. It's more of an economic policy, something that we should definitely consider from both sides. But in general, progressiveness, maybe in the US, maybe in Canada, in more Western countries, you guys are so used to just respecting these human rights. But in the rest of Europe, in other continents where it's really not like that. In Europe, what a lot of politicians use, they use progressiveness as some sort of evil and satanic thing, because it's really not so common for post-USSR states, let's say, to respect human rights and everyone's rights, and gay people's rights especially. Not only that they get harassed, which happens everywhere, I think, but by law, they're not equal to other citizens, which I think is a big problem. And when populists use this progressive term and label to kind of justify their policies, that's why I think it's a problem.
Yeah, that's definitely guilty on my part of speaking from a very, socially progressive country in which the leader of our most conservative party is a pro-life, pro-gay marriage guy that has a gay dad. So that's true. And also, I mean, like you said, the calling everything communist thing is just so silly. I'm sure actual communists are extremely offended by Marco Rubio calling Joe Biden a communist. It's if
oh my,
I got a feeling that some of the communist guests we've had are just gonna be what are you saying, bro?
Yeah, that's so horrible. I know that probably a lot of Republicans that are more radical and, sorry to say this, but not very educated, call overall the blue party communism or socialism, which they couldn't be. For me, the two parties in America are generally the same. It's just that Joe Biden is a bit more socially accepting of people's rights and freedoms and progressiveness.
Yeah, there's a famous socialist professor named Dr. Richard Wolff, and he does a great skit on these conservatives calling everything socialism. He's basically, according to these people, socialism is when the government does stuff, and when the government does a whole bunch of stuff, that's what we call communism.
I've seen that video.
It's the view. It's the thing is, as cringe as it is, it's a prominent view.
Exactly. I think a lot of people don't understand that video is satire. It's not him explaining politics, and a lot of people actually take that for money.
I know. They're
they believe that that's true.
This is what socialism is when Joe Biden cancels student debt, guys. That's what socialism is. That's all it is.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. I think that about wraps up episode 11. Thank you all for listening to our fun little rants. I had a lot of fun this episode. I don't know about you, Milda.
Yeah, for sure. Me too.
Yeah, so, I mean, of course, follow us everywhere. You know the drill. On Instagram, we're at Wake Up Call Podcast with underscores in between every word. And on TikTok, we're just Wake Up Call Podcast with no underscores, I believe. We post a lot of exclusive content there, so please like and subscribe, as the youth say. See you later.